That's right.
How are you?
Never better. How about you?
I'm doing well, doing well. You back in town or are you in Florida still?
I'm here till May 15th.
All right, nice.
Yeah,
That seems like it's probably about perfect in terms of the weather transition.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Last week we were feeling a little like Florida and then we just got smacked right back into reality today.
Oh, did you really? Uh,
So,
well, I try not to bring up how nice the weather is because it's never very nice up there this time of year.
hey, it's okay. It's actually been decent. I mean, obviously it was rough there in the month of February, but
I can see that. My wife went up there for her niece's birthday party in the middle of February. So
yeah.
I don't have any relatives that are worth that trip to me, but she did.
Well, we know where we stand, at least all of us on this call in Don Aldrich's mind. He's not going to travel to the cold to see us.
I only did that once, in April of 2018, when you were about to come on the scene around our office. So you're special.
All right. Well, that's good. I appreciate that. All right. Well, we'll wait another minute or two. And then we'll get rolling. I'm hoping for a very interactive meeting. So all you guys sitting there with your cameras off, you better be jotting down questions and tell us all your secrets. I'm just going to throw this link in the Facebook group real quick.
Yeah, Greg did a pretty good piece on marketing and Facebook and social media this morning. Bob was on that as well. Donegan.
I know I need to get that in my calendar. I always remember about 11 or 12 on Monday that I missed it. So, but they always say if it's not in your calendar, it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, well, there's truth to that. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the brave new world as far as how you go about marketing,
Yeah.
especially with the COVID running around.
I'm going to put that in my calendar right now while I'm waiting.
Yeah, I need to put that in too. I just happened to pick it up. If I don't have it in the calendar, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. All right, there it is. Hopefully I won't miss it anymore. All right, cool. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate all of you guys jumping on here. Hopefully we can have a super exciting and fun meeting today on the topic of multiple offers. I'm sure that those of you that are working with active buyers right now, this might have like a PTSD effect on you. So I apologize for this in advance. So I take no responsibility for your health following this meeting. But yeah, I thought that we could kind of go through both sides of the issue, just because I think that especially for those of you that might be newer agents or just maybe primarily have focused on working with buyers, sometimes it can feel a little like you don't understand why things are happening. So I felt like going through the conversation that personally I have usually with my listings. Bauer, come on, buddy. I know you love me, but you've got to get down. He's like crawling up my chest. And then also then going through maybe anything else that any of you guys do differently. Part of the benefit of teaching a class is you almost always learn a couple things. And so definitely would love to hear what you guys are doing. And then obviously on the buyer side of things, I think there's probably a lot of sharing we can do. I don't know. I've come to the realization I don't know what you really can share anymore, because I feel like there's nothing left to give away on the buyer side, other than your soul, firstborn, blood, kidney, heart, lungs, something like that. Maybe we'll see in a contract coming up. And then I thought I would share some anecdotal stuff, and obviously love to hear what you guys are seeing out there as well. So does anybody else have anything that they were hoping to hear that I didn't just go through? No? All right, cool. Well, let's jump right in. So first of all, I think handling multiple offers, obviously almost, I would say anymore, it's almost all properties. I would have said 6 months ago, most of the time, like under 400 or 500. Now it's no matter what price range you're in, it's multiple offers. So pretty much every price range. So on the listing side of things, I think it's super important to have these conversations with your sellers long before you ever get to going on the market. One of the biggest learning curves for me over the years has been thinking that what's really important to me is also really important to everybody else. And sometimes what you find when talking to sellers or buyers is that you actually what's important to you doesn't matter to them. And so when I talk about that in terms of multiple offers, I think the most obvious thing is a lot of times as agents and salespeople, we assume that price is the most important thing to our clients. And so having the conversation up front about the other things that are important to them, and how important is price, meaning if you could get the closing and possession date that you really wanted, would price matter as much? And asking those types of questions, because those are the types of questions that buyer's agents are going to ask you. And again, I know right now, if you've submitted an offer in the last 60 days, you probably feel like, why do you even care? Because the seller's going to get whatever they want anyways. But someday this market will pass, and you will need to have had those conversations. I also think, having 50 people through your house is not necessarily the most stress-free course of events for people. If you have children, or just if some people have OCD issues, where the idea of that many strangers walking through their house is not something that they enjoy. So sometimes even in this environment, people will, if you tell them, hey, I can put your house up as an office exclusive in my office, and we can sell it internally and probably take your showings from 50 or 60 down to 5 or 10, and probably get something close to the same price, would you be interested in that? Those are the opportunities and advantages of being in an office this size. And so those are the types of conversations that I think you should be having. And I do apologize in advance. I did not prepare a PowerPoint. So if you want to take notes, please do. And I'm sorry, maybe one of you will be gracious and write everything down and send it to everybody. But
Troy, you could take a step back beyond the conversation about people coming through the house and use one of the tactics you could use is to talk to the seller in advance of listing about what they're going to do next, and help you get the listing by saying that it's a good enough market. We should be able to insist on the buyer agreeing to you giving you either for rent or for free a long-term time after closing, so you can find a place, which might help you get the listing actually.
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. So if we step back, if we don't assume for a second that we already have the listing, there's definitely many ways that you should be talking to your clients. This is probably a whole nother class about the different ways. I actually just sent something out to my database last week about the 5 ways to navigate the market when you also have to buy, and ways to leverage your position as a seller in this market in order to, like Don said, to give yourself time to find another place. And so there's several ways. I'll just run through them real quick, and this isn't the point of the class, so I'm not gonna, we can talk offline or I can do another class. But it would, the 5 ways were: get a bridge loan, use a home equity line to access your equity, both for your down payment and also for appraisal gap coverage or anything else that you might need it for. Doing a contingency on suitable housing, which is something that's really hard to accomplish in a market other than this one. And it is, for some reason, the 4th one is escape. Oh, investor. So I actually ran across this with one of my investors: getting an investor to purchase their home, getting them the cash up front and allowing them to rent back as long as they want, from the investor, because the investor was going to rent it anyways. So giving them really as much time as they need while having the peace of mind that they've already got their house sold. And if you need an investor, call me, because either I'll buy it or somebody else in our office will, or somebody in our office has an investor that would buy it. Again, sometimes price isn't the most important thing to them. And then the 5th thing is, how many times have you walked into a listing appointment and you asked them where they were going to go and they weren't sure? One really unique idea that I heard was, what if you went ahead and sold your house, since the market is super hot, and then you moved all your stuff into storage, and you lived in Airbnbs, and you lived in Worthington for a month, and then moved to Westerville for a month, and lived in a condo downtown for a month, and then in June or July, after you had lived in the 3 areas you were considering, you decided which one you wanted to live in for the long term. Kind of a fun
Might work
idea.
well for somebody without kids.
Yeah, I mean, kind of a fun idea. You know, so those were the 5 that I sent out. Feel free to rip off and duplicate, send them to whoever you want. You know, let's create some more inventory. I think there's a lot, you know, new listings are not going in the right direction because sellers are scared and confused. They're looking to us to provide some answers. So, but back to the multiple offers, I think that, you know, you have to prepare your seller for it. You have to talk to them about what their expectations are. What they're doing next, of course, is going to determine when they're going to be moving, or you know, when we need to ask for possession, when we need to ask for closing, what items need to be included, what needs to be excluded. You know, are you going to consider escalation clauses? If you don't have all of these conversations up front with your clients and they don't know what any of this stuff means, you're going to be working 4 times as hard under a high pressure situation for both you and your client.
Hey,
So you
Troy,
should, yeah.
I have a quick question. When you go back to the escalation clause, I'm seeing that more so now. People say no escalation clause. If you are working with a listing, what's your advice to the seller? Like, is one way more beneficial than the other? Having an escalation clause, not having an escalation clause?
I don't personally mind them. I mean, I understand why some people are saying no escalation clause. My contradiction to that, because they're thinking like, you know, they don't want somebody to hold back on their best. Because like, let's say I come in with an escalation clause and I say, I'm going to pay $3,000 over the next highest offer up to 425, and I put my offer in at 400. And the seller only receives another offer for 410, then my offer would become 413, and the listing agent saying, well, that person was really willing to go up to 425. If I would have said no escalation clauses, they would have submitted 425. My response to that is I don't think that every buyer who's willing to put a cap of 425 would actually write a straight 425 offer without knowing that there was competition.
Right.
I mean, like, we had a buyer that was in contract on a place, ended up getting out of it a couple months ago because of inspection. And he felt like he was kind of overpaying. It had sat on the market. Well, he was going to watch it because the seller wouldn't come down in price. And so he was going to watch it. Well, he is like literally beside himself because like a week after that, there must have been a bidding war and somebody paid like 20,000 more than he was in contract for. And now he feels like he completely lost the house of his dreams and he was getting a steal. And so my point is, I think a lot of times buyers are afraid to go up to a price because they inside don't want to feel like they overpaid. But if somebody else was willing to pay a couple thousand less, they would feel good about it. And so I think the other option too is I taught one of my buddies did this one time. He got an escalation clause and he actually ended up getting no other offers. And so instead of just taking it at the original price, he just, as the seller, countered back at the top of the escalation clause. I mean, it doesn't preclude you from countering them just because they gave you a list price offer. So in that example, let's say I got no other offers, and as the seller, I just sent them a counter and said, yeah, you can have it right now for $425.
Yeah, you better do that relatively quickly after getting your escalation clause. They're going to know you're fooling with them.
It does, but do you want it or not?
Yeah. True.
I mean, in this market. So my point is, as a listing agent, I would rather get the offer and be able to have the conversation. That was a long-winded way to say that, I guess.
Well, and another very important point in all of these discussions, which sometimes gets forgotten, it is imperative that we're all out there knowing our market and what things are really worth. Because a lot of what you're talking about here, tactically speaking, has to do with your confidence of the listing you have there and how juicy and desirable it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, right now in this market, I feel like everybody's getting multiple offers, but it hasn't always been this way. There's been a lot of the last few years where some listings get multiple offers and others don't. And so you have to be very careful going into a listing appointment, basically guaranteeing the seller that they're going to get multiple offers, because I will promise you, as somebody that lived through the 2008 crisis, like this too will pass.
Mhm.
And when you walk into your listing appointment and tell them that for sure they're going to get multiple offers, basically no matter what they listed at, and then they sit on the market for 60 days, you are not going to be high on their list of people that they like. So I would always set expectations. And if you're not somebody who's doing a ton of transactions, I mean, I give them props. An agent buddy of mine that I know from another company just called me today on my listing that I put on the market in Dublin. And he's like, hey, I know you can't tell me details, but I've got a buyer looking in Dublin in that price range. And I kind of think I know what the market's like there, but just confirm for me. And like kind of went through like how much over list price, blah, 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 blah. Is that about in line with what they're going to need to do in order to win this other house? And I said, yeah, that's about close. And he's like, okay, cool. I just wanted to confirm that I completely knew the market. And so really understanding the market, to Don's point, and if you don't know it, call people that do. Again, another advantage of having an office of almost 300 people. Pick up the phone, call me, call Mary Chris if she just put a listing in contract last week, and find out, hey, how many offers did you get? And what's the, if there were only 2 listings on the market last week in your price range and Mary Chris got 12 offers, then that means you're still competing against 10 people or more. And if she only got 2, then you may not have to go as crazy on those offers if you're representing the buyer. Or like to Don's point, if you're putting a listing on and you tell them they're going to get 10 and then they get 1, that's not a fun place to be. So, all right. So once you establish what they want to do, then the questions are, so one of the other things that I go through with them are the ways that we can market the property. So there's what I call the traditional way, where we just put it on the market and let people set up showings and crawl all over people and, get in screaming matches because they're over my 30-minute window and all that fun stuff, which sometimes is happening right now too. Or there's the middle of the roadway where you put it on the market like that. Or I'm sorry, let me finish the traditional way. So then you just basically take offers as they come. So some people are like, you know what, I just don't want to deal with another day of showings. So I'm going to go ahead and accept an offer right now. Like that, yep, that offer looks good to me. I'm good with it. Let's go. And those are the ones that as buyers agents, we can't stand because we had the showing set up for tomorrow morning and it goes into contract. And then the middle of the roadway would be, you know, hey, we do want to call for highest and best if we get multiple offers, but we don't want to limit ourselves and set any kind of deadline. And so in that case, you're just going to put it on the market as normal, but you're going to have that conversation up front with them about how we're going to handle multiple offers. And it's going to be highest and best. You're going to set, once you get more than one, you're going to set that deadline for sometime in the future. You're going to tell people when the offers need to be left open for acceptance by, and then you're going to, you know, move forward. And then the last way, which is my personal favorite, partly because I think it's best for the seller, partly because it gives me ownership of my time. I'm not working at 11:30 at night, going back and forth between two people, is to put it on the market on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday and tell them all offers are due by Monday. And again, right now in this environment where people are waiving inspections and there's 900 offers and all of that stuff, it may seem less relevant. However, again, the market will change. And I will tell you that there was a time where we were seeing tons of transactions falling apart because buyers were running in. You know, if they were a couple buying a home, they were running in. The one person was off traveling for work. They were running in, looking at the house for 15 minutes, writing an offer within 1 hour to try to be the best, giving a 2-hour response time. The sellers took it because they loved the price. And then the inspection comes next week and the spouse or partner or whatever comes in to look at the property and they hate it. And then it falls apart. And then now you get to do it all again this weekend. And so the thing I love about the offer deadline is several. Number one, it gives people the ability to actually go through at a time that's convenient for them, where all the parties can go through. Number two, I typically do at least one open house that weekend. So anybody that's gone through with their agent during their showing time can come back again and look at it a second or a third time, which is something that back in the good old days, you actually got to look at a house more than once before you spent 500 grand. And then the third thing, especially in first-time home buyer price ranges, is that mom and dad can drive down from Cleveland on Saturday afternoon if they're going to be being part of the decision-making process, and they can come through the open house if they need to. That was happening a lot at inspections. Mom and dad were driving down from Cleveland or up from Cincinnati for the home inspection and listening to the home inspector talk for 3 hours about all the bad stuff with the house. And so my goal is to make sure that people really want the house before we go into contract. And if that means somebody decides on Monday morning that they really like the new listing down the street better than this one, and so they want to rescind their offer, I consider that a win for both me and the seller.
Well, you can
Because
also put a cost on being perfidious as regards your offer, like a non-refundable deposit after an event occurs, or
yeah, you can, and right now in this market, but when things are,
What did Don say?
doing a non-refundable deposit, and in order to make people think twice about
Oh, I see.
you know, getting out of the contract.
Yep. Okay.
But I think with what people are doing in this market, there's so much opportunity for buyer's remorse. I mean, I have buyer's remorse for buyers in this market, and I'm not even the one spending the money. So they have to be feeling buyer's remorse. So those are kind of the options. And I like to go through those, you know, again, well up front. And then I put a whole listing strategy together around that. So we take pictures on Mondays and Tuesdays usually. If we can do it the week before, that's ideal. And then we'll go on the market Tuesday or Wednesday with showing starting Friday. And then everything's centered around the open houses. And I hate to tell you guys this because you guys would probably let my team agents do open houses for you. But I will tell you this weekend at our 2 open houses that we had on a $430,000 listing in Dublin, I think our team picked up 5 or 6 unrepresented buyers, and 2 of them have houses to sell. So if you think that just because you did an open house a month ago and didn't have anybody come in that was unrepresented, it's springtime. There are people out there that are not represented. There's people out there that looked at houses last year with an agent that they so liked, and their agent hasn't reached out to them in 4 months, and they're here for the picking. Looking for somebody that can help them navigate what is a very difficult market for both buyers and sellers, frankly. It's not easy to analyze 10 offers when your agent doesn't even know how to read the offer. So I think, you know, if you know your stuff, doing open houses, I mean, I'm going to start doing them again because I feel like I have so much to offer buyers and sellers that I think that we can all pick up a lot of clients. And the cool thing is it's basically free. Like, we're all talking about paying all this money for leads. You have the listing, you did all the hard work, and now because of the market, you have 30 or 40 people that can't come through in one weekend. I mean, Ash Gale's on here. I think he's working out, but he's going to be teaching a class actually in a couple weeks on his strategy around open houses. He's one of the best. But I mean, not to take anything away from Ash, because his accent is really the real reason why he gets so much. But outside of his accent, he just does a heck of a lot of open houses. And the reality is as long as you're in front of people that are looking to buy and sell real estate, it's a great advantage. So that was my soapbox. Sorry.
Well,
All right.
I'll go somewhere, go back to the buyer side, but putting in
Yeah, we'll go back to the buyer
putting in
side
backup
here.
offers is another very good tactic.
Anybody else have any questions on pre-listing and handling multiple offers with the seller, which I think is where the majority of the work is done on the listing side? No? All right. The last thing I want to talk about with regards to multiple offers, 2 things. Number 1, take all that information that you got together and put it all in the MLS under agent to agent remarks. I was on a call last week where somebody recommended even writing everything down in terms of, are we going to accept escalation clauses? What's your preferred closing? What's your preferred possession date? What's your stance on different types of financing? All of that kind of stuff, putting it on one sheet and actually having your seller sign it, and then putting it in the documents section so that buyers and buyers agents all know that that's coming directly from the seller. And it's not just your opinion as the agent, which I know none of you can ever believe that somebody as an agent would say something that wasn't coming from their client, but it happens.
That was a Kathy Cairo trick that I learned, and it's a part of my listing documents that I go through all the. Well, now I'm going to have to expand it, but I have, like, you know, do you want to call for highest and best? Do you want escalation clauses? You know, what's your preferred closing and possession dates and all that? And it's a part of my listing documents. It's a really good idea because then it cuts down on the number of phone calls that you get.
Yep, I R&D'd from Kathy Cairo back in the day also.
Yeah,
so
I love her.
maybe we should send her a thank you note.
Right.
But I think as a person representing buyers, if you come in and see that in the documents, as a realtor, you should know that those are not cast in stone. Those are desires for people.
Yep.
You can hit their hot button and what they really want. Some of those might go out the window.
Yeah. Well, Don, see, you're in Florida. When you come back, you'll see that's not an option anymore here in Columbus. You just have to make that your offer, or you might as well just move on to the next house. But someday it'll be a desire and not a requirement again.
Well, it doesn't keep you from trying.
Oh, yeah,
You know, you
I know. I'm just
throw a
giving you a hard time.
$50,000 non-refundable deposit at them and tell them you don't like a couple of those things.
Yeah, no, I will say the non-refundable deposit is something I've seen very little of. And the smart agents, I think, would consider doing that because it's a differentiator. And there's not much coming out of the buyer's pocket up front, even with a lot of these really big offers. So,
Well, it's the non-refundable deposit in addition to the appraisal gap coverage, in addition to, you know, in addition to, and sometimes you're just tapped out money-wise with the appraisal gap coverage. And I think that's why, because I've had that conversation with buyers and they're like, Lisa, I mean, if I have to bring $25,000 to the closing table, I can't afford another $2,500 in, you know, non-refundable earnest money, you know, so there are limits to how much money people have.
yeah. All right, cool. So once I get the offers, I'm assuming most of you are probably already doing this. Can you guys see my screen? For some reason, the little thing didn't show up. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So it's really simple. It's just a spreadsheet I created in Google Sheets. And you just basically put all of the parts of the contract. Honestly, if you guys email me, or I can even post this in the Facebook group, I can give this to you. But basically, you just go through the contract and write every fill in the blank. And then that allows you to analyze all of the offers easily for your client. I still create a Dropbox folder that I share with them so that they have access to the entire offer. I wouldn't recommend only summarizing the offer and never giving them access to the actual offer, because I think the summary by itself puts us in enough of a place of being
Well, that's
liable.
license law too. You have to send them the offers.
No, right. Yes, you're absolutely correct. But
Yeah.
I organize it nicely so that
Yeah.
hopefully they're actually looking at it.
Yeah.
And then so you can either organize it by agent name or buyer name in the Dropbox folder. And then just to give you guys an idea, I thought this one's already sold, so it gives you kind of an idea of what this looks like once it's all filled in. But I'm just going to go in and fill in everything, and, you know, kind of go through all of the different offers and what all is included in them. So it gives the seller the ability to really figure out, you know, apples to apples comparison, what's going on. Anybody have any questions on
across
this?
the top. It's interesting how everybody thinks differently. All my tabs are across the top. Yours are down the side.
You know what? I changed it. I used to do it that way, but I changed it because I didn't like to have to scroll across to see everything to do with that one offer.
Okay, that makes sense.
I have a question, and it might be, you know, you do it as your seller asks, but when you get in these multiple offer situations and all of them start coming in even before the deadline, do you send those offers as you get them over to your sellers, or do you just wait till you get them all and then send them? Because I feel like I inundate my seller with, here's another offer coming over.
So that's another thing I like about this. So I just download them and put them in there as I have time to put them in.
Okay. And then you tell them to go into the folder and look rather than emailing it. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
So I can show you guys. Let me see here. I can show you guys real quick what the folder looks like. So in Dropbox, I organize all my files like this. And so I just share this offers folder and I just put everything in there just like this. And then I'll like download in .loop. I purposely download them as individual files, or in DocuSign, however you get them. I download them so that they're completely separated so that the client can easily look through, you know, if they want to. And then I'll just put them in the sheets in here, and then also put them in there. But I mean, I'll be honest, like you said, when you're getting 10 or 20 offers, like can't drop everything just because an offer came in. So I usually scroll through it and just make sure that the agent left it open to when I asked, in case there's one that comes through that's not. I always tell my clients, if you're not willing to abide by the offer deadline, then we're not doing one. So if you're not willing to walk away from an offer that we get, then I'm not putting one in there, because it's my reputation on the line for telling all these other agents that we're going to wait until Monday. Like, and then I just ask them, you know, like, if you were a real estate agent and your kid's birthday was tonight, would you miss it in order to go show a house that offers were due on Monday? The answer is no. But do you want to penalize them because they didn't skip their kid's birthday party to run over here and show the house? And usually they're like, oh yeah. And so then they're fine with it.
Have you been seeing lately that now people are saying, like, setting up these deadlines, but then saying, but seller has the right to accept an offer at any time?
Yeah, almost everybody puts it in there. But like
Yeah.
I said, I think we are the professionals. And I think ultimately you always have to present the offer.
Mhm.
Like, it's our legal obligation to present the offer. And yet it's also our, in my opinion, it's our ethical and moral obligation to have honest conversations with our clients about and set expectations. And it's very, very rare that when you just tell a seller this is the way it's going to be, if you're going to work with me, that they're going to argue with you, because you do this every day and they don't.
Mhm.
But if you're wishy-washy and, well, we have 17 different options, then they're going to pick one of the 17 options. But for me, I think it borders on unethical to advertise a deadline and then accept something. If you don't plan on abiding by the deadline, then don't set it, which is fine. You don't have to set a deadline, but if you're going to set it, you should abide by it.
Yeah, completely agree.
So, all right, any other questions on the seller side? Then obviously you're going to go through, you're going to have different offers that stand out, and then you're just going to go through and analyze, you know, what terms are going to be best. But as a listing agent, you always want to think about not what's going to be the best price, but what's actually going to get them the most money in their pocket at closing. So things like appraisal gap, limited inspections, things like that are going to be things that are going to carry weight. And that needs to be a question that you ask your seller. It's not your job to figure out how important those things are to the client. I mean, I'm analyzing a multiple offer situation literally right before this and looking at the spreadsheet, and I'm like, how much is no inspection worth to you? And he's like, well, it's only worth about $2,000. Okay, well, the offer is 10 grand difference. So then we're going to move to that offer. But those are questions that you should not be answering for them. You should be saying, in my opinion, if I were in your shoes, this is one, and here's the reason why, but it's your money. Because things go wrong. And if you go ride or die on one of these offers, and the buyer loses their job or their lender screws up the deal, guess who's going to be holding the bag on the blame? It's not going to be clients don't ever take responsibility anyways. But if you're the one that told them to pick the offer, then they're really not going to.
Troy, do you run net to seller sheets on each offer?
I don't. I do at the end.
Eyeball it.
I do at the end. I'll talk about and I used to actually do like a total here, so like under escalation. But the thing is, I don't get that many escalation clauses anymore, and I think it's because so many people don't accept them. So I kind of quit doing that, because the net to seller looks the same for all of them.
Yeah.
The only thing that's changing is the price.
Yeah.
So the difference. So I do it once we decide on one.
I'm asking because I had a listing agent that was telling me she had like 15 offers and she was in the middle of running that to sellers on all of them. And I'm like, well, wait, if the only thing that's really changing is price, then why do you need to do that? And I'm like, well, wait, am I not doing something I'm supposed to do? So
Does
yeah.
anybody else, I mean, I don't claim to always know the best way to do things. Is anybody else doing them on every offer for some reason?
Yeah, there's some agents that do.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that too, but to me it didn't make any sense because all the costs are staying the same except for the things that are in the offers.
Yeah.
So
I guess they were like closing dates and things like that if the taxes change or, you know.
yeah.
Like
I
that.
mean, once you get down to a couple, but you're still, for the most part, usually talking about a couple of
Yeah.
few $100 at most.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
All
right, cool. Yeah.
Well, I have a question regarding a seller. If you have an accepted offer and you also have an appraisal gap, and when the appraisal is done, the appraisal gap does not cover the gap, what happens? If you're $10,000 apart.
Well, I do think, I mean, that's a great point. I do think sometimes the appraisal gap clauses are not written as specifically as they could be, because if a lot of times they just say, like, I have one of these offers that I have, which is one of the strongest ones, and they basically just say, you know, buyer will cover up to X amount of a short appraisal, and I will most likely rewrite that in a counter and explain that, you know, the buyer agrees to cover up to 32 or whatever thousand it is of the appraisal gap. However, if it is more than 32,000, then buyer and seller will renegotiate, you know, or the contract will become null and void or something, because it does need, the seller needs to understand what's going to happen, and so does the buyer.
On the buy side, I think you can put a max on it though too, so that they know that you've capped out at a certain price.
Yeah, and if you're the buyer's agent, you also ought to be putting in there what's going to happen to the earnest money, because that should be something that should be in every you know, attorney-like thing that you do. And obviously that this is where we border on becoming attorneys.
What do you mean, Joy? What do you mean? What happens to the earnest money? Oh, you
Well,
mean if you can't come to an agreement on that price?
Yeah,
if covering everything.
Yeah, if you read the contract, every single contingency ends with what happens to the earnest money.
Yeah.
So if you're adding a contingency to the contract, I would suggest adding what happens to the earnest money, because if it's not added, then it becomes open to interpretation.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, and if there's a big gap between the appraisal gap and the amount the buyer wants to pay, unless they come to agreement, I guess it's just a dead contract. So
yeah, it would.
And if that language is not in there about the earnest money, then what happens to it? Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And I mean, I would say if I was a buyer's agent, I would argue that the appraisal contingency, because you didn't technically waive that, would come into play. But I think clarity is power.
I agree.
And so the more you leave up to interpretation, the more issues you're going to have down the road.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
All right, well, let's jump over to buyers real quick. I'm sure it's going to be quick.
Troy, can I just ask a dumb question real quick?
No questions dumb, Emily.
Okay. So let's just say that you are representing a seller and you get an offer that says no remedies, for informational purposes only, but they still want an inspection. What does that really mean? Does that mean that no matter what happens with the inspection that they are still taking the deal, or do they still have the opportunity to walk away on the inspection? Because it says for informational purposes only.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's above my pay grade in terms of answering it.
Yeah.
What I would tell you is that falls into the camp of, you know, you need to be clear. And so one thing that I see a lot of people do is say that they still retain all rights of termination, which isn't really a fun thing to have on page 1 of the contract, right under the great price you put. So I always actually like to include that in additional terms and conditions if I'm writing a buyer contract, like on a page that's going to go at the very end after they've gotten really excited about the price. But ultimately, I think you do need to put that, or at the very least, you should put something like buyer retains all rights listed under section, what section is it? 6.1 or whatever.
Right.
Which,
Because some refer to that and some say, and that's what made a difference from one contract to another is that, exactly that.
but I think the thing that you have to not be afraid of, and this is something, if I'm being transparent, when I first got, well, especially because I started my real estate career like in 2008 is when I started really taking listings. And that was when, if you couldn't get a deal together, it might be 3 months before you got another offer. And so like you do negotiate a little bit from a position of fear as a listing agent, because if you make the buyer mad, like they're just going to go buy one of the other 12 houses for sale in your neighborhood.
Right.
But I think right now in this market, especially as the listing agent, I wouldn't leave it up to chance. I would just send a counter over that says, this is what our expectation is around the inspection period, or this is the way we're reading your verbiage, because the reality is 9 times out of 10, you're reading into it way more than the buyer's agent was intending it. They wrote it because they didn't know how to write it, so they wrote it the best way that they could. And so if you make a decision on an assumption versus just calling them up and saying like, hey, am I reading this correctly, or did you? And then if they say, no, you're misreading it, then say, okay, well, we'd love to clarify that. I'm going to send a counter over. Can you get this signed in the next 2 hours? And if they, if they balk and walk away, it's, I know you weren't necessarily here for when I was talking about this, but it's the same idea of, accepting offers through a certain time. Like if they're going to walk away, I want them to walk away now. Like it feels really good to get a good contract, but if their whole intention is to be a brat and renegotiate everything after the inspection, then let's put it on the table now. And if the seller still decides to move forward with them, then, that's the seller's choice.
Yeah.
But if we jam them into contract with this buyer who isn't serious, then I think we run the risk of having issues.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions before we move on to buyers? All right. So what questions do we have on buyers? I don't even know where to start with buyers, to be honest with you right now. So where does everybody want to start with buyers?
You get come list me calls. That's what you do.
Yeah.
That's what you do with buyers. You get come list me calls.
I mean, today I had
put all your buyers on the shelf.
Yeah, today I had lunch with a probate attorney I know. So one of the things that my MAPS coach encouraged me to do is, who do you know that can sell but doesn't have to buy? Well, people that died are one of them. The other people are downsizers that are moving into assisted living, people that are moving out of town, so relocation. The market is not, it's pretty strong in most places in the country, but it's not the same as it is here everywhere. I have a client actually moving here from Chicago, and I talked to I referred them to a listing agent in Chicago, and the market is way different there. Actually, we have 2 people coming from Illinois, one in Champaign, who's been on the market now. They have a $250,000 house, and they've been on the market now for a month.
Wow.
With no offers.
Wow.
And then my client has these people that are coming here that they live in downtown Chicago. They have a condo in downtown Chicago. And downtown Chicago, I guess, has taken the hit similar to New York City due to COVID. And so their market, like unless you live right by the lake, their market is actually like an even to a buyer's market inside the city. So it's just an interesting thing. So just don't assume that everywhere is like here. So if people have considered moving out of town, tell them, depending on where you're going, you know, you've been talking to me for 2 years about moving to a different place. Now's a really good time to be selling in Columbus and not buying here. So other than not having buyers, what else can we do to win offers?
You know my position on that anyways. I'm like, this is a great market for people like me that don't want to deal with buyers, period.
Yeah, the problem is they still need us more than ever.
I know.
Well, you know what I've learned in the short period of time is you need to set the proper expectations with your buyers. That's the very first thing you need to do upfront.
Yeah, we know.
Now, that's the one thing that I learned with the multiple offers that I got with people is you need to just be upfront and honest and just tell them straight up. You know, you need to go in strong and you need to have the paperwork strong, and you need to say, if you're a 20% down buyer, show that you're a 20% down buyer. You need to be real strong with your paperwork.
Yeah, one tip that I have, if you're not working with a lender that's willing to run the appraisal waiver potential through Fannie Mae's underwriting system. For those of you that don't know, if you're putting 20% down, Fannie Mae will very often waive the appraisal requirement, which isn't necessarily the best thing for our clients in the long term. But if they're trying to win the offer versus writing a $30,000 check when the appraisal comes in low, I would probably rather have the appraisal waiver. So you need to have a lender that you can call on Saturday when you're putting in the offer and run the scenarios on purchase price to figure out how high they can go and still get that appraisal waiver, because sometimes it's a lot higher than I would expect. I think Fannie Mae is just trying to create another downturn with this appraisal waiver thing, but that's a soapbox for another day.
So can the lender tell you, because I was talking to my lender about that, and maybe can they tell you what can be approved to approve that? Or, because I thought she said it has to be in contract with an exact purchase price, then we submit it to see if they get the.
Well, I don't know what Fannie Mae's rules are, but my lender, which I'd be happy to share with you, is willing to put it all in there before we write the offer.
Okay, because mine wouldn't. They said they couldn't do that because they don't know the answer.
Yeah, well, I have a lender. I'd be happy
maybe
to
you
share
can
with
shoot that.
Yeah.
Give me their information. Okay.
I don't know if everybody's breaking the rules or not, so I won't call them out publicly here,
Okay.
but they're definitely doing it. And if it gets declined, we say, okay, keep putting it in at $5,000 less until it gives us an acceptance. Because then you can do you can do an appraisal waiver up to that amount. And then instead of covering an appraisal gap, you can actually pay towards seller's closing costs a certain amount over and above that. So then you're guaranteeing them that price plus giving them more cash on top of that. Because sometimes it's weird. Sometimes if you do like 20% down to the Fannie Mae appraisal gap number, by putting down 30%, they won't drop that number like in the system. And so like if you're putting down 20%, and for easy math, it's a $200,000 house. So that would be $40,000. If you put $50,000 down on the loan, they won't let you do 210 and still give you an appraisal gap waiver, an appraisal waiver. So you might need to structure the loan where you put the offer in at 200, but then you just pay 10,000 of the seller's closing costs, which is the same out of your pocket, but it gets you the house. I mean, it's not as good for the buyer, obviously, but there's that's why I'm saying I don't understand the logic behind Fannie Mae system with this. I feel like they're putting buyers in worse positions.
So you're saying that even with the 20% appraisal gap waiver, they will only waive it at 20%. If you go above putting down more than 20%, they won't waive it at that point. Is that what you're saying?
No, like let's say that price is 200,000.
Yeah.
If you put down an extra $10,000, which would decrease their exposure, right? It would increase your equity by $10,000. If
Yeah.
you put an offer in at 210, they won't approve the appraisal waiver.
Oh, okay.
So it has more to do with like what the property is actually worth than it does to do with what their equity position is in it. And so sometimes you have to still go in at 200 with the appraisal waiver and then just agree to take that money and do other things that benefit the seller with it.
Okay.
Because if you put the offer in at 201, then you won't get the appraisal waiver.
Okay, I think I know what you're saying.
Where's your lender getting their idea of what it's worth?
Right.
The Fannie Mae has 2 automated valuation modules that they use to be better than humans, I guess. Or they figure the average of those 2 models is good enough. And obviously they're also sitting at 80% or less LTV. So that's really what they're depending on, is that they're not going, you know, more than 10 or 20% off of that. But that's what I'm saying. That's why it reminds me of the subprime thing, where now all these loans that are supposed to be 80-20 or better for the investors that are A+ paper, because they're given these appraisal waivers, they're actually not 80-20 loans. And I know this is going deep, but like that's what caused the problems before, is that the A+ paper wasn't really A+ paper.
Exactly right.
And
in the various tranches, you had a bunch of C and D paper, not A and B.
yeah, and so I'm not sure people that are putting 20% down are typically C and D paper, but they're definitely not A+ paper, which is what people that are buying those mortgage-backed securities think they are. But that's like way deep into it. That's like a whole 3-class series by itself.
I'm just happy that I'm following the conversation. I'm like, oh, I know a little bit about that.
All right, so what else are you guys doing? Like, how many of you, let's see a show of hands for those of you, or if you're not on video, put your digital hand up. Like, how many of you guys are waiving inspection completely?
That's a hard one to sell. That's a hard one to sell to a buyer.
I mean, I wouldn't recommend selling it to anybody, but how many buyers are doing it?
Well, not selling it in the sense of like, I'm encouraging them to do that. My position is always, look, I'm not advising you of any of this. This is not my advice. You know, this is not my, you know, fiduciary duty in play right now. I'm just telling you that this is what it takes in order to win, and the decision is yours. So how comfortable are you with waiving inspections? And I haven't had a buyer yet tell me that they're comfortable with that.
I just saw something I think it was on our Facebook page, that someone posted that they're bringing an inspector with them on showings.
Yeah, there's a lot of agents that are doing that.
Yeah, and I was just wondering if people have had, I'm sure that puts the buyer at a little more ease, but I'm sure they're not doing a whole inspection, right?
Well, it's hard to do that in a 15-minute to 30-minute time slot on the showing, right? That's the downside to that is, and then trying to coordinate the inspector's schedule with a showing that you only have 15 minutes for. That's tough.
Yeah. Oliver, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just thinking, like, what's in it for the inspector? I mean, are you paying him per showing just to come out to put eyeballs in the home? I don't even see how that's worth their time.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, a lot of
talking about it.
A lot of inspectors are doing like basically high level inspections where they just come in and look at the foundation, the roof, and the mechanicals.
Yeah.
The other idea, going back to the listing side of things, to encourage people to not do an inspection, is to do a pre-inspection and provide that report to the buyers. Because again, as long as you don't have any really major issues, you know, buyers aren't asking for repairs anyways.
Well, so if you've got a hot potato listing, I don't know how you have the time to get all that done.
Yeah.
Well, you do it before listing, right?
Yeah, but I mean, he's saying, in this time of year, you do get some of those like, hey, I want to go on the market next week, and you might not. But a lot of time people are months ahead of time. I wish I had more hot potato listings, but people seem to be on their own schedule, unfortunately. Like,
They're really good to do, and you just sell your seller on the fact that most contracts would fall through an inspection. So you get to do it on your terms, not an emotional buyer's terms.
Yeah.
And that's always for the best. So we're starting to do that a lot more, and they're pretty receptive to doing it.
yeah.
That's something that you're paying for, Oliver, or do you have the?
No, I do not pay for that, but I show them the value and why that's recommended, and they get it. I just said, look, you get to fix it on, you're going to find something. So now you fix it on your terms, not their terms, and don't let it be a deal breaker when it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, that's really good. What else? Anybody else doing anything out of the box?
Well, I would suggest don't be too hesitant about putting in a backup offer, since a lot of these things can drop out for reasons, appraisal gap or whatever.
Yeah.
Backup offers. We're doing a coffee talk this Friday on backup offers with Tim Real. He's like a pro at backup offers. He has really creative ways to deal with those from a buy side and from a listing side. So just if I can plug that, come listen to Tim. He's a wealth of information.
What time is that at?
Coffee Talk Friday mornings, 9 a.m. every other Friday. Backup offers are great. If you can get the seller to actually take one. I've had like 2 or 3 instances where the seller didn't want to take a backup offer. It's like, what do you mean you don't want to take a backup offer? Their logic was, I'll just go back to the other offers that were, if I had 10 offers, I'll just go back to one of those. I'm like, but you're not guaranteed that those are going to be there. Or they wanted to go back to, like, if my client wasn't in like the top 3 or 4, then they didn't want to take a backup. They didn't want to take our offer as backup. They wanted to go back to those top 3 or 4 people, which I think is risky, because what if they're not there anymore? What if they're in contract? Then you're going to miss out on my buyer too, who is still a really great offer, but they didn't offer you, 50,000 over list. Maybe they offered 25.
Yeah, I think it's a tougher decision than ever before because of the variation between offers. I mean, you put the nail on the head right there. I mean, back in the day, like 2 years ago, your top 2 offers your top offers might only be a couple thousand apart.
Right.
Now, I understand the sellers. I mean, I actually just had one. I have an investor client that was competing on, it's a long story as to why she's buying stuff at market, but this property listed a little bit below market, I think. And she was paying cash, and the seller had an offer that was 20,000 more financed, but the community had a potential lawsuit, which I think is going to be a major issue for them. But the seller was willing to look at a backup offer that was 20,000 less than what they were in contract for because of the potential for the issue. But 20 grand's a lot of money on a $200,000 property. I mean, so if they think they can go back on the market and get another offer, at the higher price, that's a lot to ask to give up. The problem isn't finding buyers willing to buy your place.
Well, I don't even know that they're going back on the market. They're not going back on the market. They're just going back to the offers that they had before they have to go back on the market. So it's not even a loss for them, because they're just going back to the other 20 offers that they got.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Oliver, sorry.
Oh, no. Is that lawsuit in Preserve Crossing by chance?
No.
Okay. Somebody called me about a potential lawsuit there too, and I'm trying to learn more. We don't know anything about it. Another thing, you can look really good in the eyes of a seller. We've been going back to some of these appraisal gaps and just telling them if they would offer up in terms of seller credits instead of an appraisal gap, because that shows how much cash on hand they have. And when it's that competitive, sometimes it does get them just guaranteed cash to the seller.
Yeah, because the reality is the only time an appraisal gap matters is if the appraisal is an issue. So how many times have you had a big appraisal gap and then the appraisal comes in? Yeah.
Yep.
I did hear though on that topic, and this is not what anybody's going to want to hear, but one of my lenders said to me the other day that the appraisers are under a lot of pressure from the banks to start not. My experience this year so far has not been that they've been nice to us at all, but apparently they're being told by the banks that they need to do something about this appreciation. And so just be prepared, especially to the perennial problems with regards to appraisals, the certain lenders that are more challenging than others. And so just be prepared and get that appraisal coverage whenever you can, because I think it's going to continue to be a major issue for the foreseeable future.
You don't have as much of a problem with that down here because people have cash. So,
Yeah. Well, and I think honestly, I mean, the biggest challenge right now is for first time buyers, right? Because anybody that already owns a house is usually doing pretty well off of the house that they're selling. It's the first time buyers that now have to spend 300 grand that last year were spending 270, you know, and they decided to sign one more year's lease, and now they're having to spend 40 or 50,000 more and come up with appraisal gap coverage. I mean, we've been telling people, go talk to your, I mean, if you have family or friends or whatever, like, I mean, you got to pull out all the stops, because otherwise it's getting to the point where it's like not even worth looking.
Troy, I have a client right now that we're getting ready to, she's looking in Gahanna, and she needs the equity out of her house in order to compete. So, so that does that, you know, that means that we need to sell her house first, close on her house first, get the money, and then move her. So I like your idea about getting a HELOC. I didn't think about that.
Please, all of you on this call, if you could do one thing for me, if you learned anything today, your biggest thank you to me is going to be to never sit at a listing table again and not talk about a home equity line of credit. They take 2 to 4 weeks to get, which is way longer than most of your sellers are taking to get their house ready. And you can go to Huntington or Chase. I mean, my parents just got one 2 weeks ago. They did a drive-by appraisal. They didn't even have to clean the house for the appraiser. And they were able to get like $100,000 home equity, and their house is like a 275, 300,000. They were willing to give them $100,000 equity line, and it was like nothing. And consumers believe, and my mom believed, so like consumers believe that they're like somehow they cost you and they're dangerous to you and all this stuff. It's literally a credit card that uses your house as collateral, that charges only interest only payments. I mean,
the interest is small, very small.
It's such a great option. Like bridge loans are so expensive, and they're such a pain in the butt if you've never done one before. Like everybody always talks about bridge loans, like people that I feel like are way smarter than me always talk about bridge loans. And I'm like, just go get an equity line. The only caveat is you can't have your house listed already. Once you list your house, you can't get an equity line. So they have to go get an equity line before. But in this type of a market, so many, especially second-time buyers who are selling their first house, they don't have a bunch of money sitting on the sidelines, but they have 100 grand tied up in their house. And so now they can use that for the down payment and for any appraisal gap coverage or whatever that they need to do. The other option too is a lot of lenders will do what's called recasting. So one of the reasons why people don't want to sell first is because they only have 5% saved, but they have 10% tied up in their house, or 15. So that would give them the 20 to avoid PMI. The lenders will allow you to recast within 6 months of closing on the loan, where they'll let you take that money after you sell your current home and apply it to the principal and lower your payment back down. So you might have a couple months of a higher payment on your new place. But in a market like this where it's not a problem selling, that's an option as well.
That's good. Troy, how would you, if they do get the home equity line of credit, how would you give proof of funds to a listing agent with your offer for the gap coverage?
So like for me, I bank with Huntington. When I sign into Huntington, it literally shows me right there my available balance on my home equity line. And
Gotcha.
so I just screenshot that and send it to the agent. I've bought tons of investment properties using my home equity line of credit, and I've never had an agent balk at that. And I've accepted them too.
Okay.
I mean,
That's
it's
good.
just such a beautiful thing, guys. It's the most
Yeah.
underutilized.
I'm getting ready to call my client now, like, wait, let's
Yeah.
do this. Let's
Yeah,
do
I've been
this. This
talking to
might be
Huntington. Huntington's got a really good, product to do that.
Will they
I would
still
talk-
loan up to
Huh?
100% on your?
No, I think it's 80%.
No, it's higher than that.
Is it?
Yeah.
I just did one. I mean, not that I just did one, but I just inquired with them. Same thing. They gave me 100,000 equity line to use to go buy an investment property.
So this
Yeah.
would be 100. This would be 100% based on this special mortgage company algorithm of value, correct?
They do a drive-by appraisal. But honestly, the one in Huntington's one of those people that aren't on my like Christmas card list because of their appraisers. And they actually my mom was complaining about the appraisal. And I was like, to be honest with you, if I would have been the appraiser, I wouldn't have appraised it for that. And so especially
So
now
you're
with
off
the
the inheritance
drive-by,
list.
because they've done a lot of improvements inside, but since they didn't go inside, they weren't seeing any. So I mean, it's not always true that they're bad. I got a really good appraisal for my home equity line a few years ago too. So all right, guys. Well, I've got to run. You guys are welcome to stay on here and share some more ideas. I hope this was super valuable for you. And, let us know. I'm leading the education committee this year for the ALC. So I am the one that is helping to create the calendar. I've delegated as much as I can and continue trying to delegate more. So anybody that wants to be on the education committee, email me about that too. But if you just have a class topic or anything that you want to hear about, never hesitate to shoot it over to me. If you have somebody who that would be really good to teach a class that's outside of our market center. We actually had Mike Sunderman, got a guy from Dallas, Texas, to teach an investing class that a lot of you guys were on. That was super good. And we're going to put a whole series together around him. And so I'm always open to different ideas. And I know people get tired of hearing the same voices. And so it's always good to bring in some fresh instructors. So let me know. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks for your
Have a
time,
great
Troy.
day.